Okay, so where did we leave? Let me pretend that I don't know. What did we do last time I saw you? What was a mid-range theory? Okay, what was a mid-range theory again?
It's a theory that has a more specific focus.
Okay, more specific focus, and also probably tries to predict certain events, such as power transition theory was trying to predict the certain event of great power wars. So it wasn't very much concerned in the beginning with regional wars, okay? But later on, once the theory became more and more popular, there were people like Douglas Lemke that applied this theory to regional wars as well, or wars in Africa, or to the Middle East. So the application will get bigger as time goes by. But in the beginning, Organsky comes up with the concept of power transition because he's interested in world wars. Why? Because the guy writes in 1958. Okay? At the time, it's Cold War, and he's interested in preventing a third world war from taking place. So this guy is really interested in, okay, who's going to be the next hegemon, because the United States is not supposed to be the hegemon forever. But it will be for a long time to come after Organsky comes up with his power. So what he said was, states, the system structure, yes, is important, but the system structure is not anarchical. So lack of central authority is not the main characteristic of the system. Instead, the main characteristic of the system is hierarchy, right? I'm the queen of this system. So you always remember that when you think of power transition theory. If I'm the queen of the system, you come to me when you have trouble. You're not on your own. You're not in a system that you have to constantly struggle. I can actually help you. And in this structure, I modernize, industrialize, and my economy develops. But after a while, my development starts to slow down. And once my development starts to slow down, some other power, a challenger, might actually start getting more and more powerful, because you always increase your power fast in the beginning, but then your power increase will slow down. And this was my infamous graph that shows how the dominant power will not become will not develop too fast anymore, while the challenger does. And so last week I told you that here is an unstable period, a dangerous period, where a power transition between the challenger and the dominant power may take place. And then here was another period where the problem may take place between the dominant and the other power, the status quo power. Guys, the challenger might be a threat, might be perceived as a threat by the dominant power, the current status quo state, and there might actually be a preemptive war. What was the caveat? What was the condition of a peaceful or a conflictual power transition?
If they have like a similar ideology, so use the example of Great Britain and the UK. Maybe not ideology, but like both sides are satisfied.
Satisfaction was the caveat, right? Level of satisfaction. So how satisfied is the challenger with the current status quo, and how satisfied is the dominant state with the system that the challenger is going to bring? Okay, so if you, as the dominant power, realize that the system will be fine, I'm not going to lose much, so it's okay that the challenger becomes the new dominant power, then there won't be a war. But what did I say? How do you understand satisfaction? How do you measure satisfaction? That was the biggest criticism against power transition theory, because usually When there's a war, we say, well, there was dissatisfaction. Okay? And when there's no war, we say, well, there was no dissatisfaction. But we're trying to actually predict war here. So when we say, after there's a war, after the fact that there is a war, we say, well, this actor was dissatisfied. That's not very helpful. We actually need a mechanism, an explanation before the war takes place about how much satisfaction the challenger is holding on and how much the dominant power does. Okay? So the timing of prediction of satisfaction level is quite important in the theory. But this is a theory that actually inspired many other theories. So power cycle theory is quite inspired by the idea of power transition. So when do major powers become less or more powerful? Because when they do, trouble might actually be approaching. Okay? So Charles Doran, he writes a book called Hegemony and Its Aftermath. And he talks about, he extends the power transition idea, and he asks, is there a general pattern of peace and war? Now, why do these people deal with peace and war? Aren't there other things in international relations? Aren't there other problems? Why is it peace and war?
Because they change almost everything, or they change nothing.
Because they have huge impacts on the system, on the states. What else? Remember the yin-yang thing? Okay, war actually brings more states, or the number of states decreases as a result of war. Empires were built as a result of wars, and empires collapsed as a result of war. Ottoman Empire collapsed, right, as a result of the First World War. It was on the way to collapsing, but the World War I actually made it faster. And what else?
International organizations can be established.
Okay, international organizations may actually be established to prevent wars and peace, which changes the international system forever. And what else was in that yin-yang figure?
Economics.
There was economy there too. Okay. War and peace affects economy. So one aspect of the system is political economy, right? So war and peace, power transition, these cycles of power, according to most IR scholars that we're discussing today, make an important difference, okay, in world affairs. So the economy, global economy, will change depending on who the next power will be. What did we discuss last time I saw you? We said China could be the next great power. It was predicted that in 2020s, China will actually catch up, maybe earlier, if US cannot correct its economy soon as a result of the economic crisis these days. Then that's going to actually be an important thing to consider. We mentioned India also. India is a possible candidate for the next hegemon. So we actually said that these countries might shift the whole structure of the international system if the idea of power transition holds, okay? So power cycle theory, according to power cycle theory, there is, if you observe the historical background we covered in the first week or so, you're going to actually see that there are cycles in hegemonic power. There are some states that increase their power, so there are phases to it. There is rise, then there is reign, and then there is decline. Okay, so a hegemon will rise, and it will stay a hegemon for a while, and then there will be a period of decline, and in the end of that decline period, there will usually be a hegemonic war, a power transition, okay? So why is this, for us, why is this relevant? Why is this relevant today?
Because we can use it to understand the international system.
Today? How?
So we could use this logical cycle to examine what's going on with the United States.
Okay. So the most interesting question for several IR scholars these days is the US in decline? Is the US as a hegemon in the path of getting replaced by another hegemon? Was it a good decision to invade Iraq? Was it a good decision to get in Afghanistan for the US? So all of these questions that we ask today are questions that are relevant for these theories. So we can look at these questions using these theories that we cover in this course. Now, according to Charles Doran, the cycle takes about 100 years. How did he come up with the magic number of 100 years?
Start position.
Not really. He did an empirical research. What did he look at? Yes.
So he looked at history, like the, you call it ordo methods?
Absolutely. Didn't we say that there were superpowers of that time, mostly naval powers, and those naval powers such as Portugal and Spain, Netherlands, Britain, they were all great powers for about 100 years. Britain was an exception to his rule because Britain's reign actually took about 200 years before Britain fell out of grace as a hegemon. Okay? So he looks at the historical background that I showed you, and he observed that these powers will come and go in about 100 years of cycles. Now, one thing about this whole theory, can we actually argue that the cycles got smaller or shorter at this day and age? Has it been 100 years that the US is a hegemon?
No.
Not yet. Okay. So some people say, okay, so US didn't lose the hegemony yet, so you can argue that Charles Doran might still be right, but some people believe that US will not stay a hegemon for 100 years, and that actually this theory has to be revisioned, and the cycles actually become shorter and shorter because we live in a globalized world now. Everything is faster, right? So everything comes and goes, everything is fast, there's the internet, the information is everywhere. So the hegemons, those who subscribe to this theory, would believe that the hegemons might actually come and go in shorter cycles because it's a globalized world now. Everything is faster. Technology makes the cycles shorter. And also, we do not live at an age that naval power is the most important power anymore, right? There is what? What kind of power seems to be more important now? Nuclear power, right? So we have nuclear states at this point. So when you have, well, I have great ships is no longer something to be extremely proud of because a nuclear attack can actually get rid of those ships like that, right? So these guys actually would say that the cycles, the length of the cycles will change because communications and technology and everything and military technology as well has been changing. Okay, all these things have changed. So the length actually might go from 100 years to less, okay? Now, the biggest criticism for this theory is what? What might be a criticism to the theory? What is the independent variable or the cause? What's the cause here? What causes war? Well, did I say anything about economy yet? What? Yes.
The cause is time.
The cause is time. Okay, you were in the management department, right? Does it make sense? Time cannot really be the independent variable here. Time is basically what the variable, when the variable will be changing, right? But so far, what I've told you is that as time goes by, hegemons change, okay? So in realism, I told you that distribution of power was actually an independent variable. In neorealism, I told you that the structure, when I look at the structure of the system, is it multipolar, bipolar? That was an independent variable that explained what would happen. Now, all we're talking about is really time. And time cannot be an independent variable. Something else should happen, right? When you break up from your girlfriend or boyfriend, as time goes by, do you feel better? Yes? No, it depends. Sometimes. Depends on what? How much you love the person. And other variables. Another independent variable is how deep your love was, like a Bee Gees song. How long the relationship took, right? All these different factors would matter for the dependent variable of how long it will take to forget. But guys, in the meantime, let me ask you something. After the breakup, if you just sit home, and if you don't do anything but just sit home, will you be able to forget? So is it time really that heals all the wounds? Okay, once you break up, you'll start to socialize again. I'm giving you free advice here. So you'll start to socialize. You'll start going to different places. You'll actually realize how much you love your family. And you will socialize with your family too. And in the meantime, of course, time will go by. But as you get your mind off of the breakup, you're going to start feeling better. Of course, if you actually win the lottery in the meantime and you become richer, that's going to help too. But don't take this as an advice. Well, actually do. If you find someone else, a new boyfriend or girlfriend, wow, that's actually going to be great help in forgetting the old one. Now, here, time is something that actually helps you to forget, yes, not because time is the independent variable there, but because as time goes by, you do several things to actually replace the old girlfriend or boyfriend with the new one, okay? And once the new one comes in, you will most probably forget the other one completely, or it might actually be a while, okay? Now, so with the same logic, in a theory, we can argue that time is important, but we can't really argue that time is the independent variable. Okay? It's actually intervening in the process, but it is not the independent variable. There has to be some other causes. Mehmet over there said something about economic causes of decline. And I am going to talk about it. Now, hegemonic stability theory. Another mid-range theory this time builds on both power transition and power cycle, and argues that every hegemon will build its own system. And when they do, they will establish institutions to support that system. International organizations is one of the ways to do that, okay? So once you establish the system, you actually share the costs of being a hegemon. Those institutions that you establish and the middle powers who are helping you, who are allying with you, will share the costs, okay? So once the costs are shared, then the hegemon will actually reign and will continue to be the hegemon, okay? So this whole cycle of rise, reign, and fall, or decline, depends on how stable the hegemon arranged the system to be, okay? So Kindleberger, a couple years after Charles Doran, says, well, the reason why the Second World War took place was because Britain as a hegemon rose, and then it reigned, right, all of 19th century, and then it started declining. And by the interwar period, before the Second World War, Britain actually could not hold on as a hegemon because the economic system in the whole world collapsed. So this guy is talking about, in his book, The World in Depression, he's talking about the Great Depression of the 1930s. Okay, so once the collapse of the international economic system took place, it was easier for fascism to rise, and it was easier for all these other ideologies that we will talk towards the end of the class to rise and to hold in the society. So guys, if you are extremely poor in this class, and if I tell you to go invade another professor's class, I'm not going to give names, we're on record. So we go to another professor's class and we invade, and I say all the money that we get out of that class, I'm going to give it to you all. Kıvanç already wants to fight now. Talha does too. So you're all like, okay, if I am extremely poor, I'm in a position to actually subscribe to hyper or extremist ideologies that I wouldn't normally do, okay? And that actually leads to an ideology like fascism to become a huge ideology in not only Germany, but also in Italy. So Nazism was possible as a result of the economic depression, according to many of these scholars. Okay? So a hegemon then politically and economically stabilizes the system. When the hegemon is in decline, there is no last resort of creditors. Okay? You need money. You're a poor country, you need money. You go to Britain, Britain doesn't have the cash either. So the whole economic system came to a decline by 1929 and then continued in 1930s. And as a result, there was incredible unemployment. And as a result, these people actually believed in everything that was told to them about going to war, about invading new countries that will bring new economic resources, that will bring new jobs. And it's actually quite, isn't it quite easy if I tell you, you know what, Tülay, your job is taken by this other guy in this other class. So you start, I start sowing the seeds of hatred in you to the people in the other class because you think that they're getting what you deserve. Okay? So it's very easy to actually manipulate people's minds by these ideologies at times of Great Depression. That's what the hegemonic stability theory is all about. So it says that when there is an economic crisis, you should be very careful, because the decline of the hegemon can actually lead to a power transition or a world war. Okay? So war might be a consequence of decline in hegemonic stability or increase in hegemonic instability. Okay? Why is this relevant today? Or is it relevant today? Is there an economic crisis today? Okay, in the world, right? And it's a global. Oh, Turkey doesn't experience it. True. Okay, yeah. So there is an economic crisis in the world that has been going on for a few years now. And according to some IR scholars, such as the hegemonic stability guys, this is actually a dangerous time. This is actually a time that tensions between states might turn into hegemonic wars. So any tension is something that we should look out for. So these guys, the hegemonic stability theorists, would argue that an economic crisis might actually be cured by war. But at the same time, wars kill a lot of people, so they're not desirable. How can a war actually cure an economic crisis? In the country, yeah. Just speak up. I can't even. What? Oh, okay. Invasion of Iraq. A consequence of economic crisis? Well, or is it the cause of an economic crisis? So, can we actually argue that U.S.'s economic crisis was actually a result of invasion of Iraq? Yes, Mehmet?
Selling weaponry to other countries or giving them loans or
Okay, so in wars, you sell a lot of weapons. That's the truth, right? Let's not talk about speculations. Let's just talk about the facts. What do we know about wars? Some states that produce weapons actually sell a lot of weapons during wars. Okay, what else?
The unemployed people go to war, so therefore the state did not need to feed them.
Okay, actually, unemployed population, by going into wars, unemployed population are fed by the solidarity of the people in that country, right? So in Second World War, there was huge unemployment in Europe, and one thing that actually really worked was some of the unemployed actually died in the war. It sounds horrible, doesn't it? Yeah, it sounds horrible that the surplus of people get killed. And so unemployment might actually be going better as a result. And production will increase because the country will be producing the materials that are extremely important for war, right? What else?
And also, after the men went to war, the women become employer.
Oops, women actually owe to wars? Well, actually, that is something important, an important point, because women start working in Europe before the First World War, and then working of women, employment of women becomes even more widespread before the Second World War. But the problem is, when the husbands and sons come back, the women will be pushed back home, but this time they're not going to really accept it. So I am going to talk about this in a few weeks, actually. Feminism actually is also a consequence of these power transition movements in the system as well. Several things that you never thought about, actually. Okay, let's start thinking about these things. I'm not saying that war actually is desirable because they help women to get out. Please don't get this out of this discussion. All I'm saying is, and I'm going to repeat this all throughout the course, there are unintended consequences of everything. Okay, we don't always plan things. Sometimes there are consequences that we didn't plan. These are unintended consequences. And that's actually something that comes out of this Great Depression and economic crisis. Wars may actually be a cure to depressions. It's just one of the perspectives. Okay, I'm going to talk about today, Thursday, I'm going to talk about other theories, and they're going to say that it's a hideous idea that war can actually be used in that way. Okay, now, hegemonic stability theory says the hegemon keeps the system stable, right? But it is really Robert Gilpin, and you are supposed to read this guy for this week. It's really him who talks about how political economy matters for the international system, for power transition, and for power cycles. Okay? So he says that there are several economic reasons for the decline of a hegemon. The first one is that the hegemon's competitiveness will decline in time. By the way, what's the time? Jay, are you tracking?
7 minutes.
Oh, okay, all right. So you'll let me know. All right. Competitiveness. Why would the competitiveness of the hegemon decline as time goes by? Okay.
One explanation of the 100-year cycle is that there's 3 generations. And the first one builds an empire, the second one consolidates, and the third one goes over.
Okay.
That is one explanation.
That's one good explanation, yes. So in time, at first, innovations are made and everything is in its best shape. But after a while, people will not want to work as hard as they did, and they will want cheap labor. And they're going to use cheap labor, and they will want luxury, right? So once you start getting wealthier, you're not going to want to do the difficult jobs that you can get others to do for you, okay? So this actually explains a lot for the migration patterns as well, right? The migrants will do the more difficult jobs in your country because you have become wealthier and you don't want to actually do the dirty jobs, cleaning the toilets. Is there anyone who would willingly do that?
I did.
You did. Were you very willing to do it? Okay, you got paid. Did you really need the money? Okay, would you do it if they didn't pay you? You wouldn't. So the point is, you're not going to do these things unless, willingly, unless you have no other option or you really need the money. You're going to use that money for something. Did you actually buy something that you really wanted with the money you earned? Why did you do it? What did you do with the money?
The Danish wages are get paid a lot.
Okay, that's actually good.
I have no idea what it used to be.
Okay, you forgot what you did with the money. But the point is, in Denmark, they actually paid you a good amount of money to do that, right?
Minimum wage is high.
Okay, so the minimum wages is high. Well, in our case, in our country, minimum wage is not really high. And honestly, as a college professor, if I was asked to clean the toilets of the university as a, night job or for extra money, instead of doing that, I would actually do something else, because I would think, well, you know, I can do something else. And that actually is because I'm educated enough and have the luxury to pick what to do as an extra thing, right? So as an extra thing, if I want to make extra thing, I take projects. So I use my education to make the extra money. But if I didn't have that education, then I would actually do whatever is available with the minimum wage.
And if you have the education but there's nothing available?
Exactly. If I had the education but there were no jobs at all, and if I really needed the money, I would actually do the worst of the worst, right? So it's something to survive, it's something that you would decide to do. So that moment, cleaning the toilets does not become something horrible anymore, because you actually really need the job. Now guys, competitiveness is related to what is your labor force like, okay? Are they educated? Are they innovative? Do they actually want to do the jobs that are available? So in time, you actually become less competitive. That's the first reason, according to Gilpin. And he's actually looking at the historical case of Britain. Okay? So his case is Britain. And technological diffusion is a second cause. And he says, well, Britain industrialized first. Britain had technological innovations first. It had military technology, technological innovations first, and all that. But technology and innovations diffuse, they spread, guys. You can't hold on to it. I think I already gave you the example. Nuclear power. You lose the recipe because there are spies all over the place. You actually lose the advantage of innovating it first after a while. At that time, when there was no internet and communications and transportation were not as advanced as today, you could have held on to your innovation for 50 years, but that would be it. Or 100 years, maybe. Hence the cycle of 100 years. But in time, you're not going to be able to hold on to your technology, so other states will catch up. And other states will also industrialize. When they do, they're going to catch up with you. Okay? Just remember that graph, power transition graph. Celal says I have to shut up now, and I'm going to see you in 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, so where did we leave? Let me pretend that I don't know. What did we do last time I saw you? What was a mid-range theory? Okay, what was a mid-range theory again?
It's a theory that has a more specific focus.
Okay, more specific focus. And also probably tries to predict certain events, such as power transition theory was trying to predict the certain event of great power wars. So it wasn't very much concerned in the beginning with regional wars, okay? But later on, once the theory became more and more popular, there were people like Douglas Lemke that applied this theory to regional wars as well, or wars in Africa, or to the dominant power. Then there won't be a war. But what did I say? How do you understand satisfaction? How do you measure satisfaction? That was the biggest criticism against power transition theory, because usually when there's a war, we say, well, there was dissatisfaction, okay? And when there's no war, we say, well, there was no dissatisfaction. But we're trying to actually predict war here. So when we say, after there's a war, after the fact that there is a war, we say, well, this actor was dissatisfied. That's not very helpful. We actually need a mechanism, an explanation before the war takes place about how much satisfaction the challenger is holding on and how much the dominant power does. Okay? So the timing of prediction of satisfaction level is quite important in the theory. But this is a theory that actually inspired many other theories, so at least. So the application will get bigger as time goes by. But in the beginning, Organsky comes up with the concept of power transition because he's interested in world wars. Why? Because the guy writes in 1958. Okay? At the time, it's Cold War, and he's interested in preventing a third world war from taking place. So this guy is really interested in, okay, who's going to be the next hegemon, because the United States is not supposed to be the hegemon forever. But it will be for a long time to come after Organsky comes up with his power. So what he said was, states that the system structure, yes, is important, but the system structure is not anarchical. So lack of central authority is not the main characteristic of the system. Instead, the main characteristic of the system is hierarchy, right? I'm the queen of this system. So you always remember that when you think of power transition theory. If I'm the queen of the system, you come to me when you have trouble. You're not on your own. You're not in a system that you have to constantly struggle. I can actually help you. And in this structure, I modernize, industrialize, and my economy develops. But after a while, my development starts to slow down. And once my development starts to slow down, some other power, a challenger, might actually start getting more and more powerful, because you always increase your power fast in the beginning, but then your power increase will slow down. And this was my infamous graph that shows how the dominant power will not become will not develop too fast anymore, while the challenger does. And so last week I told you that here is an unstable period, a dangerous period, where a power transition between the challenger and the dominant power may take place. And then here was another period where the problem may take place between the dominant and the other power, the status quo power. Guys, the challenger might be a threat, might be perceived as a threat by the dominant power, the current status quo state, and there might actually be a preemptive war. What was the caveat? What was the condition of a peaceful or a conflictual power transition?
If they have like a similar ideology, so use the example of Great Britain and the UK. Not ideology, but like both sides are satisfied.
Satisfaction was the caveat, right? Level of satisfaction. So how satisfied is the challenger with the current status quo, and how satisfied is the dominant state with the system that the challenger is going to bring? Okay, so if you, as the dominant power, realize that the system will be fine, I'm not going to lose much, so it's okay that the challenger becomes the new